So we're going to continue, of course, with our study of the kings of Judah tonight. We're going to look at Ahaziah, Athaliah, and maybe we'll get to Joash. Depends on how much you have to say about the first two. So, we've looked at, as you remember, we are going through the kings. We went all the way through the kings of Israel and then started over with the kings of Judah. Tonight we're going to get to the point in history where the two kind of overlap each other, where the two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, are oftentimes ruled by allies and even cousins at some point. So it's an interesting time in the history of the nation of Israel. But you remember we looked at last week we looked at Jehoram, and we want to think about where we are in the point of history. Remember, the southern kingdom of Judah lasted about 345 years approximately. And that is after the division, after Solomon, at the time of Rehoboam and the separation into north and south, they lasted another 345 years, the southern kingdom did. We are, at this point, about 90 years into that process, into that time frame. So not that far from when they were a united kingdom under Solomon, when things were pretty good, were really good. The epitome of economic wealth and also to some degree, at least in the beginning of the reign of Solomon, some religious fervor, spiritual maturity in terms of a nation. Contrasting that with what we're going to be looking at tonight. We also remember that all of the kings of Israel were all bad, but the kings of Judah, there were some good ones and there's some bad ones. The two predecessors, or the three predecessors to Ahaziah, you remember we talked about Asa, who was a really good king. He sought after God. He did not make foreign alliances, at least in the beginning of his reign. He depended upon God. But then, towards the end, he did make an alliance with Syria, and God punished him for that. At least it's inferred that it was punishment. The last 2 years of his life, he had diseased feet, the scripture tells us. And then after him came Jehoshaphat, which was, in my estimation, one of the very best kings. I didn't realize how soft a heart he had until I studied him for our class a couple of weeks ago. But Jehoshaphat was a really good king. He trusted in God's protection. He instituted some religious and some secular reforms that led to spiritual growth for the kingdom. He even participated personally in some of those teaching forays out into the country. A really good king. So we have Asa, Jehoshaphat, two really good kings, and then along comes Jehoram, which we looked at last week. And he's just a terrible person in comparison to those two. And there's a primary reason for that. And what was that? You remember? Why did Jehoram turn so bad?
The influence of his wife.
Yeah. Jehoshaphat was a really good king, but he made one big mistake. He made an alliance with Israel, and that alliance was a marriage alliance between Jehoram, his son, and Athaliah, Ahab and Jezebel's son. And because of that, everything went south in the southern kingdom. Let's look at a couple of scriptures that kind of remind us of that over in 2 Chronicles 21. Let's read a couple of verses beginning in verse 12. And remember, this is a letter that the prophet Elijah sent to Jehoram, rebuking him and telling him that he was going to be punished for his idolatry and some of the things that he had done in the southern kingdom. And then a letter came to him from Elijah the prophet saying, "Thus says the Lord God of your father David, because you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father and the ways of Asa king of Judah, but have walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and have caused Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to play the harlot, as the house of Ahab played the harlot. And you have also killed your brothers, your own family, who were better than you. Behold, the Lord is going to strike your people, your sons, your wives, and all your possessions with a great calamity. And you will suffer severe sickness, a disease of your bowels, until your bowels comes out because of the sickness, day by day." And then the Lord stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and the Arabs who bordered the Ethiopians, and they came against Judah and invaded it and carried away all the possessions found in the king's house, together with his sons and his wives, so that no son was left to him except Jehoahaz, the youngest of the sons. And so after this, the Lord smote him, that is Jehoahaz, who was also Ahaziah, two names for the same guy. Now it came about in the course of time at the end of 2 years that his bowels came out because of his sickness, and he died in great pain. And his people made no fire for him like the fire for his fathers. He was 32 years old when he became king. He reigned 8 years, and he departed with no one's regret. And they buried him in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. So we have in the historical run-up to Ahaziah these two really good kings, and then we have this, I don't know, what do you call him? Just a terrible, terrible leader in the southern kingdom, and God punishes him. Part of that punishment was that the Arabs and the Philistines came against him, carried away everything he had, and killed all of his sons except one, and that one being Ahaziah. So now tonight we're going to look at the reign of Ahaziah. Have any thoughts or comments up to that point? Okay. So Ahaziah's age, we'll use the outline that Craig has given us in our lesson book to kind of look at each of these kings. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned just 1 year. And he was the only son left of Jehoram, which we just read about. Kings of Israel during his reign, since he only reigned 1 year, there was only one king during his reign, and that was Joram, or another Jehoram, king of Israel. So Ahaziah's father was the same name as the king of Israel during Ahaziah's reign. And who was this Jehoram in Israel in relation to him, in relation to Ahaziah? Somebody figure that out for me, because I tried and tried and tried. So Ahaziah's mother was Athaliah, and Athaliah was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And so Athaliah was the sister of the new king in Israel, Jehoram. So that makes them cousins, doesn't it? Yeah. I was thinking second cousins, but no, they're actually first cousins. So we have two cousins reigning, one in the north, one in the south. And of course, that's going to lead to a lot of alliance, lead to a lack of hostilities between the two countries. Up to the time of Asa, there was constant hostility between the two countries, fighting back and forth. Probably why Jehoshaphat made that alliance with the northern kingdom. Seemed like a good idea to him, but it led to the downfall of the southern kingdom of Judah. Okay? Any thoughts? Was Ahaziah a good or a bad king? The scripture says he was a bad king. Looking at 22, verse 2. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri. He also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab. Now that's the northern kingdom. He walked in the ways of the northern kingdom, for his mother was his counselor to do wickedly. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab, for they were his counselors after the death of his father to his destruction. So Ahaziah's counselors were his mother, Athaliah, and some other people who had come down from the north to counsel him and led him back into the institution of worship of Baal and the reestablishment of the high places, and all kinds of things that God found to be offensive. Okay? Notable acts. You only reigned 1 year, so there's not a whole lot of notable acts. But what did you come up with? Any?
Joined up with the king of Israel, they went against the Armenians. Abraham.
Yep.
That's where he was killed.
So let's think about that for a while. He, as Steve mentions, he allied himself with his cousin when they went to fight against the Syrians or the Arameans. Who was the king of Aram at that time? King of Syria. Remember? Hazael, right? And the Syrians won that battle. They wounded Joram, the king of Israel, the northern kingdom, and he withdrew from the battlefield and went back to Jezreel to heal from his wounds. Apparently Ahaziah left the battlefield also, because the scriptures tells us that he went down to Jezreel to visit his cousin, doesn't say his cousin, to visit the king of Israel who had been wounded. And he's there when what happens?
Jehu comes along to kill off Joram.
Yeah. Jehu, let's talk about that now. Talk about God's involvement in the events leading up to this moment in Judah's history. What Austin has just mentioned, Joram or Jehoram, either one is applicable. King of Israel has gone back to Jezreel to heal from his wounds. King of Judah, Ahaziah, goes up to visit him. And while he's there, Jehu, who was the commander of the northern forces in this battle over here in Ramoth Gilead, he comes down to assassinate the king of Israel, Jehoram, which he does. And in the midst of doing that, he realizes that Ahaziah, king of the southern forces, southern Judah, southern kingdom of Judah, is there also. Some of his men say, hey, there's Ahaziah. What do you want us to do with him? And he says, kill him too. Right? What has that all got to do with God's will? Do you see anything in there, or is there any lessons in there for us? How is God involved in all this? Let's read another verse. Verse 7 of chapter 22. Now the destruction of Ahaz was from God, in that he went to Joram. For when he came, he went out with Jehoram against Jehu, the son of Nimshi, whom the Lord had anointed to cut off the house of Ahab. Scriptures tell us that God was behind this. What had God done previous to this to set this all up to accomplish his will in regards to who is reigning in the north and the south? What had he done?
Declaration that the house of Ahab would be destroyed.
Yes, yeah, he told them that, right? Yeah. He told Ahab that I'm going to cut your house off, right? Maybe not in your lifetime, but in your son's lifetime. What else had God done?
Didn't he appoint Jehu specifically to do it? He was the one who's going to carry it out.
Yes. Where is that? Let's see.
2 Kings 9.
2 Kings 9. You remember when Elijah had defeated the 400 prophets of Baal and then became so discouraged that he took out south and went all the way to the Mount Sinai, and God tells him, let me see, that wasn't what I was looking for. Where is that story about Elijah? Somebody find it for me. But he's on Mount Sinai, and God comes to him and says, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I'm the only one left. There's nobody left in Israel but me who honors God." And God says, "No, there's not. There's 6,000 people. Now get up and go and anoint 3 people. I want you to anoint Hazael and tell him that he's going to be the new king of Aram, of Syria. I want you to anoint Jehu and tell him he's going to be the new king of Israel. And he's going to destroy the house of Ahab. And I want you to anoint Elisha as your successor."
It's in 1 Kings 19.
1 Kings 19. Verse 13, when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Then he said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away." The Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram, and Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place." So this is years before this has happened. God has set in motion these events that are happening right now in the life of Ahaziah. He's appointed Hazael to fight against Israel. He's appointed Jehu to end the dynasty of Omri, or another way of saying it, Ahab's house. And he's told Elisha to be his successor. What did Elisha have to do with all that? You see, Elijah never gets to that point. But Elisha is the one who either does it himself or he sends one of the sons of the prophets to do it. And so now we see God in the background saying, now's the time for it to happen. Now's the time for the house of Ahab to end. And all of it comes together in the assassination. I'm not sure about Jehu's involvement with killing kings of the southern kingdom. I don't know. He obviously did it. It seems later he's rebuked somewhat Jehu for his bloodthirstiness. But I can only assume what verse 7 tells me, that God was behind it all. So we see all that, behind the scenes, God is involved in the nations. Is there a lesson there for us?
In some ways, it's the same kind of lesson that we talked about, that we've been talking about in Revelation. And God is going to win. And people who refuse to bow down to God, refuse to acknowledge Him as God, He's going to suffer the consequences of that.
Nations and individuals.
Absolutely.
Okay? Any other thoughts? Surely you have some thoughts. You want to express them? You know, we get really political when we're not in this building sometimes.
We do, and it's comforting. I mean, to know that I'm not in charge and truly God's in charge. And so it doesn't matter who wins at the polls. And I can be as crazy about it as I want to be, but ultimately I don't have any control over it, and neither does anyone else. And so I have such comfort in that because I know that God's in control and He's got me.
Good. Anybody else? Everyone's comfortable with what happened yesterday? You have to be, right? Okay. All right, so Ahaziah is assassinated by Jehu. So his successor is obviously the next son in the lineage, right? So we come to this character in some of the listings of the kings of Judah. Athaliah is listed. In other ones, she's not listed. Is she one of the kings of Judah, queens of Judah, or is she not?
They called her a usurper.
That's right. Craig in the lesson book says she's a usurper. What does that mean?
That she took over where she wasn't really in line to do.
Yeah.
I don't have to say that, but
Yeah, she wasn't God's choice of successor. She usurped that decision. I think that's probably right. I mean, what are the details of her ascension to power? Remembering that she was the mother of Ahaziah, who Jehu killed. Then what does she do? When she sees Ahaziah is dead, she immediately goes and
Kills the others that were rivals.
kills all of the other heirs. I assume that these are children of Ahaziah, but all the other anybody who's in the royal line, who's a potential successor to Ahaziah, she goes and kills them, except one. What? But she is killing. Who is she killing?
Her grandchildren, right?
At least some of them. I mean, there could have been more than one wife. There usually was. But she just bloodthirsty and sees an opportunity. She goes and kills anyone who might have a claim to the throne.
well, she had such an influence, I guess is one way of putting it. Okay, it's a high. And I think she was afraid she would have influence on the other.
Yeah.
And so she wanted to run the way it did run.
You know, the scriptures say that she was one of his main counselors.
Right.
You think maybe she was like the power behind the throne, the decision maker on a lot of things? I would dare say that's probably it. How long does she reign? 6 years. And we'll talk about Jehoshabeth and Jehoiada in a minute, but how does her reign come to an end? She's put to death by who? Do you remember? Jehoiada is behind it, but he literally co-opts the entire nation into a revolt against her rule, brings in all the Levites and all the heads of the families throughout the nation, brings them in, and they go through this ceremony of crowning the next king, which is Joash or Jehoash, whichever, two names for the same guy. And while they're in the midst of crowning him, setting him on the throne, she comes running out yelling, "Treason! Treason!" Now, as much of a counselor, as politically astute as she probably was, she didn't read that room very well. And so Jehoiada says, "Take her outside the temple. I don't want any blood. in the temple, but they take her outside the horse gate. As soon as they get beyond the boundary of the temple, she's dead. Okay? What else do you have to say about Athaliah? That's important.
Maybe I didn't read it right. I thought it was, the reason they had to take it out because God said not to do it. Did I not read that right?
Well, that might be true. I think, I don't know. Did you find it in there where it says?
Yeah. I was reading the Bible one time.
Jehoiada the priest brought out the captains of hundreds who were appointed over the army and said to them, "Bring her out between the ranks, and whoever follows her, put to death with the sword." For the priest said, "Let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord." So they seized her, and when she arrived at the entrance of the horse gate of the king's house, they put her to death there. Anyway, was this God's will? Yeah. That these events occur in the history of the southern kingdom. Was this Satan?
So if you're asking if was it God's will that the Jehoshaphat had the house of Ahab married into his house, I would say no. Now, did God use that situation to fulfill his purpose? I would say yes. God does not necessarily approve, well, he doesn't approve people with evil. God approves. But will he use people who choose to do evil to fulfill his purpose? Absolutely. Think about Pharaoh. He was evil. He chose poison. God gave him a 10-point lesson on who he was. And did he ever repent? But God used him for his purpose.
Okay. Austin?
I just say that I think that what God wanted to happen was for those who loved him and feared him to listen to him. It seems that Jehoiada and his wife, I'm not saying that, they had faith in God. They did what they could to protect the lineage of David, to save Joash from Athaliah. And, like Dad said, people do evil things. And that doesn't mean that God said, you know what, in my grand plan for the kings of Judah, I want Athaliah to come in and do these evil things. And so, at the end of the day, Athaliah is technically in the lineage of Jesus, so, from what I can gather. So, I mean, it's not that God's will has a way of working beyond what we could see it as a plan. If that makes sense. We may not see the plan in all the crazy and all the sin that occurs in this world, but God's plan will work out.
Okay. Anybody else?
One of the things that God was wanting to take place, or was going to take place, was the fact that there was going to be a lineage from David that was going to exist through these reigns. So, even who was Jehoram, it says that yet the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David because of the covenant which he made with David, and since he promised to give him the land, then his sons forever. He's referring to Jehoram, allow him to be king, even though he was on the side of Israel, speaking Ahab, was influenced by his wife.
I meant to read that verse. Thank you for reminding me in verse 7 of chapter 21. Yet the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David because of the covenant which he had made with David. And since he had promised to give a lamp to him and his sons forever. You remember the promise that God had made to David all the way back, that someone of his lineage would sit on the throne forever. Now, surely that's a reference to Christ reigning over the kingdom, the spiritual kingdom that encompasses the church, but is not entirely the church. But anyway, Athaliah reigning would not have accomplished that. It actually would have broken that covenant if she had been successful in eradicating all the lineage. I just see Satan in this striving to put himself in a position of contention against God. Of course, he's never going to win, but he's never going to quit trying either. It's interesting, just an interesting spiritual sidelight into what is going on behind the scenes, I think.
I think it's also, you think about later on, you're going to see in Habakkuk where God says he's going to do something, but they don't believe. And Habakkuk's like, okay, it's coming. He says, well, I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans and wipe out the, Judah. Lord, we're what we are. He uses evil for his purpose. To accomplish his purpose. Now, Chaldeans don't get off scot-free because God's going to hold them accountable too. But he uses it for his purpose.
Good, Alan.
There's evil all throughout history. The people that killed Jesus were evil in a way. God used that to bring about salvation to the whole world. So if you look back on the Job situation, what the devil did to him was evil. It was the devil, but God let him do it. So if God, we'll never understand why he does what he does, but the bottom line is he's going to win, and we want to be on his side.
Okay, good. It's just, it's a personal conflict I have, trying to rationalize God's use of what appears to be evil people to accomplish his purposes. And the problem is he making them do that? Well, it doesn't. That would not be consistent with what I see in the scriptures. And yet, he uses those people somehow to accomplish good things. And so, for me, that's always a hard rationalization to work myself through. I just thought maybe you would want to talk about it. Think about it a little bit. Okay, so Craig said that he just wanted us to go through Ahaziah and Athaliah and not go any further, so I guess no. But you guys are really have to talk some more now, because I don't want to finish Joash. I'll be in trouble. So Joash is that one little baby that's saved from the purge of Athaliah and trying to kill all of the descendants of David so that she can reign. She almost accomplishes it, but there's one that's preserved by two people. We've mentioned Jehoiada, who apparently is the chief priest, and his wife, Jehoshabeth, who is one of the lineage too. She is the sister of Ahaziah, the king. So she's of the royal family. So we'll go through our list here. Who was the predecessor of Joash? Was Ahaziah, who was just assassinated by Jehu. And how old was he when he started reigning? 7 years old. So, how old was he when he was hidden away by Jehoshabeth? He was like less than 1, right? But she reigned for 6 years. And so here he is, Jehoiada, setting him on the throne at 7 years of age. He's been hidden away for 6 years. So. And he reigns for 40 years, 2 Chronicles 24. Is he a good or a bad king? Mixed? Okay. So what does it say in 24:1? Joash was 7 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Zibiah from Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. There's a conditional there. He did right all the days of Jehoiada, which is an inference that after the days of Jehoiada, he didn't do so right. So who was, well, this is a thought question. Who was the real king? I don't know. There's some indications that he grew into being a king, but at least at the age of 7, obviously, you're not going to be a stalwart decision maker. You're going to have to give that responsibility to somebody else. Austin?
There's multiple times through chapter 24 where there's occasionally where it says the king commanded, but so often it says brought before the king Angelo, and then the king Angelo gave it to these people, and so he's at least a right-hand man, advisor, so to speak.
Okay. So kings that reigned during his 40 years, there's Jehu, Jehoahaz, and then just briefly Jehoash. Again, someone of a different, same name of a southern king becomes king of the northern kingdom. We just read that he did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest, who instructed him.
I get the impression that Joash is a follower.
Yeah.
Because,
Certainly initially, yeah.
he's not a leader.
So let's talk about Jehoiada and Jehoshabat. Who were they and what did they do?
Well, it sounds like Jehoiada was an advisor. I mean, he was a priest, but he was an advisor. And he also acquired him a couple of wives, it says.
What was the last part?
It says he acquired him a couple of wives.
Oh, yeah. That was interesting, right?
So anyway,
But I think
business deal,
that was probably the way it worked all the time, right?
that still was.
They made alliances with other people, and do you happen to have a daughter handy
Right.
that I could take? Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll take that one.
Yeah.
Jehoiada he's called the chief priest in one particular verse. Verse 6 of chapter 24. So the king summoned Jehoiada the chief priest and said to him. So he was the chief priest, the high priest. And his wife, we talked about, was the sister of Ahaziah, so she was of the royal family. But she was the one who took this little baby, less than a year old, and his nurse, and hid her away when Athaliah came killing everybody who was of the royal family. Hid him somewhere, probably in the temple, I would guess, but I don't know that to be fact. And then in the bedroom, yeah. Initially, they hid that. So apparently that was off limits. They couldn't go in there or something. I don't know. So for the next 6 years, they pretty much let things ride. And then in the 7th year, verse 1 of chapter 23, he goes throughout Judah and gathers the Levites and the heads of the families, fathers' households, and brings them to Jerusalem, and goes through this ceremony where they all come together and bring this 7-year-old boy to the house of the temple, stand him between the 2 columns on the porch, put the crown on his head, and proclaim him the new king. And we talked about Athaliah hearing the tumult, comes out and sees what's happening, shouts treason, treason, and they take her out and kill her. Then in verse 16, Jehoiada made a covenant between himself and all the people and the king that they would be the Lord's people. And all the people went to the house of Baal and tore it down. They broke in pieces his altars, his images, and killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. What did Jehu just get done doing in the northern kingdom? He just wiped out Baal in the northern kingdom. Got them all together in one room and then burned it down on top of it. And eradicated Baal worship from the northern kingdom completely at that point in time. here we see Jehoiada using his position of authority to do the same thing, at least in Jerusalem. Now, I don't know how far that reached out in the country, but Baal worship was done away with in Jerusalem at this point. And he stationed gatekeepers of the house of the Lord so that no one could come in or out who was unclean. And in verse 21, so all of the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet, for they had put Athaliah to death with the sword. Then the rest of chapter 24, or the first couple of verses, talks about some notable things that Joash did before Jehoiada's death. He did what was right in the eyes of God as long as Jehoiada was alive. Was Joash a figurehead king? And Jehoiada the powder behind the throne? We talked about that a little bit. It would seem to be, at least to some degree, that way. But we see over in chapter 24, verse 6, where the decision had been made to restore the house of the Lord, and they decided to go out and collect some of the monies that had not been being collected, that was due to the temple, in order to be used for the reconditioning, the repair of the temple. And in verse 6, the king, that is Joash, this is in the 23rd year of his reign. So he started reigning at 7. This is the 23rd year. He's now a 30-year-old man. And he goes to Jehoiada and says, look, we had set up this procedure to repair the temple. Nothing's happening. Why have you not required the Levites to bring in from Judah and Jerusalem the levy fixed by Moses, the servant of the Lord, on the congregation of Israel for the tent of testimony? For the sons of the wicked Athaliah had broken into the house of God and even used the holy things of the house of the Lord for the Baals. So that the house of God, the temple, had been looted, had been vandalized and looted, and they'd taken all the precious utensils, not all of them, they'd taken some of them at least, out of the temple and used them in the worship of Baal. Yes, Brandy?
So it says the sons of Athaliah. So at what point was this done? Was this done prior to her husband, the king, passing? Because she killed all of them. So who are the sons, and at what time is this being? What time frame is this referring to?
I don't know. She was the power behind the throne during Ahaziah's reign, maybe then. But I don't know. Sometime in the past, they had looted it all and vandalized it all, which required it to be repaired and what's the word I'm looking for? To no longer be profane, or to make it holy again. They had to go through some cleansing rituals. And my point was that Jehoiada was now Joash was now calling Jehoiada on the carpet, saying, we had this plan, you were going to go collect these funds and do this work, and nothing's happening. What's going on? So that gives me some insight that by the time he gets to the 30th or the 23rd year of his reign, when he's 30 years old, he has grown into some leadership skills, some authority. He's taking some responsibility, and he's turning to Jehoiada, who had to some point in his reign had been the power behind the throne. And now he says, look, I'm with you, but you're not doing your part, so get on it. It seems to be maybe an illustration of kind of a turn in the power structure. So they did they got a chest, they cut a hole on top of it, they put it in the temple, and everybody going out would drop in their alms or whatever it was. Austin?
I think it's interesting that it talks about the people rejoiced, the princes and the people rejoiced to bring this payment and taxes. And so you just get the idea of how bad the reign under Athaliah was. It talked about the city was quiet when she died. So it seems to me that there was rioting, there was, a lot of unrest with her being in charge. Now that she's gone, we've had 23 years of peace, under this covenant that Jehoiada had made between him and the people and the king and God, that God would be their king and their God, and this seems to, we've talked about it before, that as the leadership goes, so go the people. And so as they turn to God and they've seen what seems to be at least not hostility, some form of prosperity at least, and rest, that they are eager to serve, worship, give to God.
Good. That's a real insight into the spiritual condition of the nation. Good. So, one of the things that they were deficient in was the utensils in the temple. They'd all, or some of them at least, had been looted. Over here in verse 14, when they had finished with the repairs, that's referring to, when they had finished, they brought the rest of the money before the king and Jehoiada, and it was made into utensils for the house of the Lord, utensils for the service and the burnt offering, and pans and utensils of gold and silver. And they offered burnt offerings in the house of the Lord continually all the days of Jehoiada. Now when Jehoiada reached a ripe old age, he died. He was 130 years old at his death, and they buried him in the city of David among the kings, interestingly. When Joash dies, in verse 25, when they had departed from him, these two people who assassinated him, when they had departed from him, for they left him very sick, his own servants conspired against him because of the blood of the son of Jehoiada the priest, and murdered him on his bed. So he died, and they buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. So Jehoiada, the high priest, when he died, he went into the tombs of the kings. When the king died, they buried him, but they didn't bury him in the tombs of the kings. So there's a real insight into the populace's perspective on who these two men were. So, we talked about some of the things that he had done before Jehoiada's death. After Jehoiada's death, one of the things he did was he killed Zechariah, Jehoiada's son, and that's in the latter part of chapter 24. Verse 20. Well, let's read verse 17, 18, 19. But after the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. They abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherim and the idols. So wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for their guilt. Yet he sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord, though they testified against him. They would not listen. Then the Spirit of God came on Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest, and he stood in the temple above the people and said to them, Thus God has said, Why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord and do not prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. Because of that condemnation, because of what they had done, he's inspired by God to condemn them, and as a result of that, he's killed at the command of the king, verse 21. Thus Joash, verse 22, did not remember the kindness which his father Jehoiada had shown him, but he murdered his son. And as he died, he said, May the Lord see and avenge. So with the death of Jehoiada, Joash basically becomes a totally different person. These verses we just read said that was to some extent because of his new advisors who came to him and turned him back. Who were they? I don't know. Maybe they were, I don't know, from the north, new counselors. But his reign during the life of Jehoiada versus his reign after the life of Jehoiada is just two different people. Austin.
We talked about he was raised from essentially birth. He was less than a year old or so whenever Jehoiada took him in. This was his brother, by all accounts and purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, he was raised by Jehoiada and Jehoiada's wife. It was not like this guy who just happened to be another prophet. It was God clothed this person to be the person that would be most likely to get to him, talk sense into him, and kill him instead.
Good. So I'll tell Craig that we are still talking about Joash. He'll continue.
Okay, let's see number 768, one more soul. 768, let's see all three verses. And for the righteous river, after our labors are o'er, rescue our souls in the heaven, on the eternal shore. Oh, soul of the sinner, there we shall rest, never to roam, free from all fear, happy and bright. Jesus is there, He is alive.
Morning, or good evening, I guess it is. Good evening, good to see everybody here for a period of Bible study. Certainly glad that you're here. Look forward to every opportunity that we have to get together. The next opportunity will be Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, and hope that you can join us at that time. Do have a number of guests that are with us. Certainly glad that you came our way. Hope that you'll take advantage of every opportunity to come back. As far as announcements goes, Janet had her colonoscopy this morning, and Doc said it looks good, so let's give praise to God for that. Danny is having a bypass surgery tomorrow morning at 7:30, heart surgery, so let's keep him in our prayers. The doctors that are going to be doing that surgery, keep them in our prayers as well, that everything will go well with that. Don't really have any other announcements related to that. Ken and Mary, as we announced this past Sunday, have both been sick. Ken had thrown his back out, so keep him in our prayers. And of course, let's continue to keep Sarah and Milt in our prayers as well. And then the only one I know that's out of town is Wiener. Wiener's in Florida, and so keep her in our prayers for a safe trip. And those are the only announcements that I have. Does anybody else have any other announcements that need to be brought up that I missed? No? Okay. For parting comments, Proverbs chapter 4, 2 times in Proverbs chapter 4, in the first 9 verses, the father tells his son to get wisdom. In verse 5, he said, get wisdom, get understanding, don't forget or turn away from the words of my mouth. And then later on in verse 7, he said, wisdom is supreme, so get wisdom, and whatever else you get understanding. Cherish her, and she will exalt you. Well, a few chapters later, wisdom makes the appeal. Beginning in verse 12, I, wisdom, share home with shrewdness and have knowledge and discretion. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate arrogant pride, evil conduct, and perverse speech. I possess good advice and competence. I have understanding and strength. It is by me that kings reign and rulers exact just laws. By me princes lead, as do nobles and all righteous judges. I love those who love me, and those who search for me find me. With me are riches and honor, lasting wealth and righteousness. My fruit is better than solid gold, and my harvest than pure silver. I walk in the ways of righteousness along the path of justice, giving wealth as an inheritance to those who love me and filling their treasures. So what did I bring that up for? Get wisdom. Get understanding. And wisdom makes the promise that it's going to be well worth your trouble to do that. Well worth it. So let's have a good week seeking wisdom, seeking understanding, so that we can be more pleasing to God. If there's nothing further, we'll be dismissed with a word of prayer.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you now, thankful for this hour that we've had to come together as a group and worship you. Lord, we're thankful for this time that we've set aside to meet with Christians of like faith. We thank you for the encouragement that they give us. We ask that we encourage one another. Lord, help us to always glorify you in everything that we do. Help us to always be a shining light in the world, and help us to always be bold in our faith. Lord, please be with us as we go throughout the rest of our week. Help us to know you are in power, and help us to look to you in times of need. Lord, please be with the sick of our number that are not with us. Help them to get back to their much needed health. Help them to be able to come back to us. Lord, we thank you for his life. We ask, please, of us to always be a shining light for you. And it's your son's name that we pray. Amen.